Good afternoon, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Okamoto-san. How are you doing?
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Before I start, I want to thank Pfizer for developing one of the COVID-19 vaccines, BNT162b2, for saving billions of lives today. And it is really a great honor to be connected with Pfizer today.
Thank you very much for your kind words. They are very much appreciated. At Pfizer, we saw developing the vaccine as really an obligation for us as a pharmaceutical company. And it's been a privilege for us to be able to contribute to society in such a way that touches every one of us, right? None of us has been completely untouched by COVID. And if one of us hasn't had COVID, we certainly have friends and family members and people we know who've been impacted by us. So it's been very important for us as human beings as well to be able to develop the vaccine. So thank you.
Can you please start by telling us a little bit about the history of Pfizer?
Sure. So Pfizer was founded by Pfizer was founded by two cousins, Charles Pfizer and Charles Earhart, in 1849 in Brooklyn, which is, as you know, today is New York City. And they started out by selling what's known as fine chemicals in English. So kind of the raw materials that make up drugs and other chemicals at the time. And that's how the company started. And from those very humble roots, they've grown into the company that you see today over a very long period of time.
Can you please explain how you wish to distinguish Pfizer from others in the industry? Perhaps you want to tell us about the philosophy behind your mission and breakthrough that changes patients' lives under your CEO, Albert Bourla.
Absolutely. So Albert has been an amazing inspiration to all of us. And Albert's key tenet was that as a pharmaceutical company, we shouldn't be doing things that make just a little bit of difference, maybe a small improvement over things that are available today, that we should only be spending our time and spending our resources and really thinking about the things that could make a massive difference to patients. So that's what we focus on as a company. So a great example of that is the drug Sabinco, or I guess it would be Shibinko in Japanese, which Kosei Dosho recently just approved. And Shibinko is a pill for a condition that's known in English as atopic dermatitis or eczema. It's a condition that causes red, flaky, itchy, and painful skin. And it's a really horrible condition for those people who suffer from it. So our innovation was, for one, having a pill that patients could take once a day very easily and simply. But number two, something that gives them very, very rapid and very deep relief from itch, because that's one of the primary complaints that patients have. So we're very happy to soon be able to offer that to patients and doctors in Japan.
I understand the successful development of BNT162b2 is mainly due to mRNA. Would you please explain the mechanism behind it as simple as possible, please?
Absolutely. So I think everyone has heard of DNA, right? DNA is in all of our cells in our body, and it's what the cell uses as its instructions to make everything our body needs, right? So you can think of it as the blueprints for our body. If you're building a house, you need the blueprint. It tells you how long the wall should be, how tall they should be, etc., right? And DNA, again, is like the blueprints for our body. But DNA just sits in the nucleus of our cells. So DNA can't do anything by itself. So it needs a helper or a messenger. So that helper is what's known as messenger RNA or mRNA. And mRNA goes out from the nucleus of the cell and out into the rest of the cell, excuse me, and it helps, it's the instructions to make the proteins that build everything else that the cell needs. So basically, we couldn't live our life without messenger RNA. So the concept was that we're using this natural process, which the cell is already used to, instead of, in this case, making something that the cell normally makes, to make what's known as a spike protein, which is on the outside of the virus that causes COVID-19. So this spike protein is how COVID or coronavirus gets its name, because it looks like the spikes on a king or a queen's crown. And that's what helps it latch onto our cells and infect our cells. So we inject mRNA into patients, and the mRNA goes into the cells, and then the cells in our body make the spike protein, which then go out into the blood, and our immune system, which is what defends our body, recognizes this as something that's foreign, that shouldn't be there in our body. So our immune system develops immunity against the spike protein. And then when someone is actually infected with this coronavirus, the immune system is able to recognize it and attack it very quickly, all without ever being infected with the virus. So that's the key innovation. Traditional vaccines do something similar, but they take much, much more time to produce, and they require much bigger shots, maybe more shots in some cases. So that's some of the advantages of mRNA technology. You can produce them very quickly, and then you can develop a very rapid immune response and very strong immune response in the body, as we've seen with COVID-19. Does that make sense so far, Okamoto-san?
Good.
Okay. So you also asked, what else could mRNA be used for? So certainly it could be used for other vaccines, especially for infectious diseases. So it could be used for vaccines against other viruses. So for example, we are currently in clinical trials testing a vaccine against the flu using mRNA technology. It could also be used to produce drugs in the body. Again, just like the body could produce the spike protein, it could produce drugs that the body needs, let's say, to attack cancer or to meet other needs in the body. So it's a very versatile technology, and it can produce drugs and things very, very quickly. So and in a very large scale, as we also saw with COVID-19.
So Chris, how much revenue is being generated by the BNT162b2, and what is the impact of the products on your total revenue?
Absolutely, Okamoto-san. So as of our second quarter earnings results, which we gave in late July, we had projected $33.5 billion of revenue from the vaccine this year. And our guidance for total sales for the company is $78 to $80 billion in total sales. So at the midpoint of that guidance, which was about $79 billion, that would mean that the vaccine would represent approximately 42% of our sales for the entire year.
Can you please discuss your commitment to provide the COVID vaccines for the people in the low-income countries without out-of-pocket costs?
Absolutely. That's something that we're very proud of. We realized that when we were fighting this pandemic and we saw that we had a vaccine that was going to be something that would work in people, we wanted to make sure that it would be something that it wasn't just the people in the rich countries who would have access to the vaccine. But even in the rich countries, we want to ensure that people would be able to get the vaccine without any cost out of pocket on their own part. So that was even in the richest countries. But then in the middle income and lower income countries, which so often, unfortunately, are ignored by pharmaceutical companies, we wanted to make sure that those people would also have fair and equitable access to those vaccines. So we made a commitment for both this year and next year that in each of those years, we're going to be distributing at least 1 billion doses of the vaccine to low and lower and middle income countries. So that's what we've committed to.
You have recently announced that you have begun the study of oral antivirus drug for the prevention of COVID-19 infection among those who have been exposed to the virus. Can you please talk about these efforts?
Yes, absolutely. As we've seen in the US, unfortunately, although theoretically every adult American today, or virtually every adult American today, has access to the vaccine and is indicated for the vaccine. There are many people who, for whatever reason, haven't been getting the vaccine. So we realized it was important for people in that situation to have a treatment alternative for them. So that's one reason why we were developing it. Another reason is even in people who were vaccinated, it's possible in some cases for them to have what's known as breakthrough disease. And we wanted to have an alternative to help those people as well. And the goal of our antiviral, which is known as a protease inhibitor, which is a type of antiviral that's been used for many years against hepatitis C and against HIV. So maybe people in Japan would have heard of this type of drug. But the advantage to this is whether someone has had the vaccine or not, they get sick with COVID, they could take this for 5 days and hopefully it could keep them out of the hospital and hopefully keep them from having severe illness. So that's our goal. But even beyond that, we're also studying it in the population of people who don't have infection yet, but they were exposed to someone who was infected. And then we're also developing it to hope that they have the opportunity to then take the drug to prevent infection with the disease. So that's what we're working on. We started clinical development of this drug very recently, but we're hoping to get the data still in the fourth quarter of this year and potentially even be able to file the drug before the end of the year.
So timeline, you might be able to do before the end of the year.
Yes, that is our hope, correct.
That's great. Okay. You are working on other vaccines besides BNT162b2 for COVID that profoundly have an impact on older people. This type of product is very relevant to the people in Japan because we are an aging country. Can you please discuss them?
Absolutely. Thank you, Okamoto-san. So I think it's also true that not just Japan is aging, right? The entire globe is aging. So this is of relevance everywhere. I would say one of the primary ways we help older people today is through our Prevnar vaccine, which is meant to prevent what's known as pneumococcal pneumonia. So there's a virus, Strep pneumoniae, which can cause pneumonia, can cause other problems, especially in older people. This is a significant cause of pneumonia in older people, which in the US, affects more than 1 million people and leads to many deaths every year. So our vaccine, Prevnar 13, and then the recently approved Prevnar 20, is one thing that's helping older people prevent this type of pneumonia and keeping them healthy and well. That's one thing. Another thing which I touched on recently in our conversation was that we are developing an mRNA version of flu vaccine. Again, people might not think of flu vaccine very much, but again, that is something that kills thousands and tens of thousands of people in the US every winter. And I'm sure the same is true in Japan as well. A third area that especially infects older people, and sorry, this is going to be a little bit of a technical term, but there is a bacterium called C. difficile. And people who've, maybe they've been in the hospital or maybe they've been sick and they've gotten antibiotics, they're at risk for getting an infection in their intestine from C. difficile. And this infection can cause very serious diarrhea, especially in older people, which can cause hospitalization and can, in some cases, lead to death as well. So that's very severe. So that vaccine is in the later stages of clinical development, and that's something that we hope to have available to patients if that trial works out well.
Okay. What would be the next blockbuster drug, and when is the expected launching date?
Yes. So a couple minutes ago, we spoke about our COVID protease inhibitor antiviral pill that we're expecting to get the clinical trial data very soon, so before the end of the year. And if the data and safety there are good, then that's something we would hope to file as soon as later this year and could potentially be available to patients next year. Obviously, we are still in the midst of the COVID pandemic, so it's a very high priority for us. A second one is our vaccine for RSV, which we're developing both in mothers who are pregnant with children to help the mothers protect their babies after they're born with a shorter term immunity from RSV, which can be very serious for newborn babies. But then we're also developing RSV in adults, and we hope to have the data for the vaccine in adults available before the end of the year as well. That's something that we started very recently, but we're very aggressively developing that because RSV, like influenza and like COVID and like pneumococcal disease, is something that affects older people, especially in the winter, can be very severe. So those are two things that are coming hopefully relatively soon, and we think could have a very big impact on people's lives and on society overall.
Until 2025, your revenue driver continues to be BNT162b2. Is that correct?
That is one of the drivers, but as you know, we've said that we think that there's going to be a need to have an annual booster every year, just like there would be with influenza, you know, in the fall before the winter season starts. And we think that's likely to be the case for COVID, but we are not sure yet. So from the patients from our phase 3 trial who got the first 2 doses of the vaccine and then got the booster shot, we will continue to follow those patients. And then come fall of next year, before what would be the winter respiratory virus season, we're going to randomize those patients again. And some of those patients will be revaccinated, so they'll get a second booster shot. So that would be their 4th COVID shot in total. And some of the patients will get a placebo. And then we'll see how those patients do compared to each other. So if it seems like there is a need for that, then that is a potential that, again, every year people could be vaccinated for COVID. But we don't know yet. But I would say that even if this version of COVID doesn't need a vaccine, it could be that in 2 or 3 years, something else comes back that could need a vaccine. And again, that's one of the advantages, the mRNA technology that we talked about, that we could develop a vaccine very, very quickly in less than 100 days to a new variant of COVID. So that's something that now that we have the skills and the infrastructure, that's something that we have the ability to do. But putting the COVID vaccine aside for a second, between 2020 and 2025, we expect to have a 6% revenue growth for Pfizer, again, excluding COVID. And that growth would be driven by our current largest drugs right now, which would be about $8 billion of that growth. And then we have $6 billion that we would expect to be the contribution from our pipeline between now and then to get to that 6% revenue growth.
Can you please explain your focus on R&D?
Yes. So Pfizer, as we talked about, is focusing on breakthroughs that change patients' lives. In fact, you can see it over my shoulder as well. But that means drugs that can be very important. And we focus on 6 therapeutic areas. So one is oncology, so cancer. One is immunology and inflammation. So like the drug Sabinco or Shabinco that we talked about. Another would be internal medicine, where we have the drug Eliquis, which is a blood thinner to prevent blood clots. Another area would be hospital products. And then the last area would be rare diseases, where today we are treating patients with diseases like hemophilia, for example. So those are our main focuses of our business, and also the focuses of our drug development and R&D.
You mentioned 6% revenue growth. Is it without M&A? I mean, is it organic growth? If so, with M&A, that would be a different story. Can you please discuss your M&A strategy?
Yeah. So the 6% growth that we talked about from 2020 to 2025, which we gave at our Analyst Day last September, in September of 2020, that goal excludes anything related to COVID, and that excludes any M&A that hadn't happened before that point. So yes, in a sense, M&A that we've done since then, or M&A that we could do between now and 2025 has the potential to add sales.
What is your overseas business strategy? How about Japan?
Yeah. So Pfizer has been in Japan since 1953, and it's very important for us, one of our largest markets, in fact. And since 2012, when we took what was known as our generics business or off-patent drugs business, and we transferred that into a joint venture with Mylan, which we then later, in 2019, spun off our entire business of that type into a company called Viatris, which was shares we contributed to our shareholders that merged with Mylan. So we're no longer involved in that generics business. So in Japan and globally, we are focused on developing new and innovative drugs and really meeting those unmet needs of patients. So that's what we're focusing on.
Can you please discuss your ESG initiatives?
Yes, ESG is very important to us as a company in areas like diversity, inclusion, gender equality, areas like climate change, and very importantly to us, access to medicines, right? So earlier we talked about the commitment we made to fair and equitable access to the vaccines at affordable prices, specifically for COVID-19. So that's one example of our philosophy.
I think you have a great dividend history to tell your shareholders. Do you care to tell us about that?
Yes. So Pfizer, as I said, has been in existence since 1849. We haven't been paying dividends since 1849, but we've paid more than 300 consecutive dividends. And we've also had more than 10 years of increasing our dividend. So that's something that we're very proud of. Paying the dividend and being able to grow the dividend is one of our very important capital allocation priorities as a company as well.
How about buyback?
Buyback is also something we've done quite a great deal of. But I would say we have our dividend as a core priority. We have reinvestment in the business as a core priority. And then we also have M&A or external innovation, as we might call it, as another core priority. So after those priorities, if we still have excess capital, then our preferred method to return that to shareholders historically has been through buybacks. But again, I just want to be clear. It's the level of buybacks will go up and down over time, depending on the opportunities that we have to invest it and to earn future returns for our shareholders. But again, as we talked about, dividends are one of our important priorities. And I will mention that our dividend yield is more than 3.5%, which in Japan or in the US is a pretty good yield. I just looked today and I noticed that the 30-year Treasury bond in the US is only yielding about 2%. And obviously that doesn't grow. So hopefully our dividend is 3.5% and will continue to grow over time. That's our goal.
Now, lastly, do you have any message to your shareholders and potential shareholders in Japan?
Yes, well, thank you for your time and interest. We very much appreciate it. And we would be very happy to have any or all of you as shareholders of Pfizer. And hopefully in this brief conversation that we've had, you see in Pfizer a company that you also would believe in and respect and would like to invest in. And if you choose to do so, it would be our honor. So thank you for your time and interest.
Chris, thank you very much for doing this call in your busy schedule. Have a good evening.
Of course, Okamoto-san, it was my pleasure.